Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Michael Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today would be the smartest guy in the room, Mr. Michael Becker, but he is on a vacation day today, so he sends his best. He also wanted me to tell you, don't forget about the Old Capital Conference coming up here September 22nd, 23rd at Texas Ranger Stadium. This is the premier event if you are familiar with multifamily and you're trying to make a connection to find maybe a general partner or have general partners find limited partners. What a great idea that we think we have, that we do it every year, and we get these two groups together. And so we want you to come. So if you are from California and you're looking for ideas to invest in Texas or invest in West Texas or invest in other places, this is where a lot of people get together and they form those relationships at the Old Capital Conference. So go to the oldcapitalconference.com website, reserve your time, and you get your ticket to come see us on September 22nd, 23rd. So hopefully we'll see Greg and Grant there. So in the podcast today, our co-host, Ryan Irvin. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be on, Paul.
So Ryan is with Old Capital, is one of our number one loan officers for Old Capital. If you don't know Ryan, get to know him. Former underwriter with one of the largest multifamily companies in the United States that did a tremendous amount of bridge loans and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans and affordable loans. And so Ryan brings a ton of experience to the table. So Ryan, thanks for joining us in the podcast. I want to introduce two guys that we see a ton of business come from that I think that you want to get to know. When we're talking about business, we're talking about business sometimes, not only just in primary markets, being primary markets of Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, or Kansas City, some of these large metropolitan markets, but sometimes the smaller markets get looked over. But I'm going to make a case today. I'm going to pound the table a little bit for our friends over in West Texas, in a little town called Lubbock, Texas, home of the Texas Tech Red Raiders. So Greg Brown and Grant Roehm, thanks for joining us today. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Thanks for having us on, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. We appreciate you spending some time with us. Greg, I'm going to let you kind of tell us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about, how long you've been into the multifamily business.
As far as just straight multifamily, probably for the past 3 or 4 years. I got my real estate license in 2009 and I started residential and kind of worked my way over here. And now this is just what we focus on. And it's been a fun time. I think you get to meet a lot of neat people and get in front of a lot of opportunities. And it's been blessed to be here.
That's great. Now, you have, I'm going to conclude, a West Texas accent. A lot of people are not familiar with what a West Texas accent is all about, but Greg, I think you have it. So,
I don't have a cowboy hat on.
But Grant, are you from West Texas originally, or where are you from?
Well, I was going to say, you should ask this guy where he's from, because it's probably a town that most people are familiar with because they live on the same planet. But, Greg is from West Texas. I'm from the Houston area.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Missouri City, and I grew up there, went to high school there, and I actually came to Lubbock for Texas Tech University, like a lot of people. And I met this guy when I was in college as a sort of an intern level. Got my real estate license my senior year, and I was working with the team, and, something in the water just convinced me to stick around.
Tell me a little bit, you came up the ranks of going to college in a West Texas town, Grant, and then did you get a degree in business or real estate? And what attracted you to getting into the real estate business?
Yeah. So my degree is in finance, and there was a concentration of real estate. I was part of the real estate organization at Tech, headed up by Jared Harold and Stephen Bushbaum there. And they really taught me a lot about just the industry and a lot of different, metrics to look for coming out of college in various positions you could be in. There's so many jobs in real estate to fit any sort of personality or what you might be interested in. And at the time I got my real estate license and was working at, KW Commercial with Greg. And I really liked the brokerage side of things. Before I graduated, I was an intern in Houston with Allen Harrison Development Company, and they were building, Class A multifamily. And I liked the product type and I liked being in real estate. And that was a really awesome part of it. But I just wasn't sure that, being on the analyst side of things and being behind the desk was really for me. And Greg really showed me, what brokerage looks like and the people you get to meet and that sort of thing. And that's really what spun the interest.
That's great. That's good. So how long have you guys been teammates together on a one-on-one basis like this?
It's about 3 years.
Yeah. It's nice.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about West Texas. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on in West Texas. And if you were to talk with somebody from Atlanta or somebody from Florida, how do you define West Texas? Or how do you define the Metroplex? Give us a little geographical areas, some of the areas that you guys work in.
I say, West Texas, as far as the markets that we cover, is kind of central and West Texas. So anything I-35 into the west and then I-10 into the north. So, El Paso is the farthest west you can go in Texas. So we cover there all the way kind of to San Antonio and the Hill Country and up north. So we don't, right now, we don't get into DFW or Austin much. We probably need more people to cover those markets, but all the markets in between, like the Lubbock, Amarillo, San Angelo, Abilene, some Waco, those are kind of markets that we focus in.
If somebody's not from Texas, they sometimes don't understand how big Texas is. If you were to drive from Dallas to Santa Monica, California, the halfway point on your drive, you're still in Texas.
Right. Yeah, so, El Paso's about the halfway point.
It's about the halfway point. And, that's how big the state is. In fact, if you get up early in the morning and you drive all day, it is tough to see the end of the world. But you can actually see the end of the world when you are in El Paso. It is it is a nice town. But so you guys handle West Texas. And again, let's do the geographics. Anything probably past I-35, which kind of goes from Minneapolis down to Mexico, right? Kind of the center of the state or so, and everything west of 35 all the way to, say, El Paso. Large towns that you cover would be like Lubbock, Abilene, Amarillo, San Angelo. Some of these towns that a lot of people have never heard of. Some of them have. Maybe Midland, Odessa. That's where kind of the home of oil and gas is from. You guys cover that. And so you're a little bit of a different animal because you are two guys that handle this large territory, this huge territory. And is there a lot of multifamily properties from that 35 corridor all the way to El Paso? Give me an idea about, if they're not familiar, some of the sizes of these towns that you guys cover. So
in total in our database, we've got about 2,244 properties. It's about 243,000 units in those markets. Size of the markets, like Lubbock is 280-ish. With El Paso's almost 700, 680.
This is in terms of population.
Yeah, this is population. Yeah. So probably the smallest market on here is probably
San Angelo, somewhere around there, about 100,000 people.
Yeah. So most of these secondary markets are anywhere from 80 to 100,000 up to 700 or so.
So give me an idea of the business that you're in. Are you doing A+ multifamily in some of these towns? Are you doing the C properties? Are you doing a little combination of everything? Tell me what a typical transaction looks for you guys.
I'd say a typical one, probably Class C, some B. I think last year or this year so far, we've done anything from a 9 unit to 119 unit. So that's kind of the deal size. We have done a kind of A deal in El Paso with a smaller property. But for the most part, it's stuff built in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, so a lot of value-added properties, but these, a lot of these properties are fairly well maintained. Tell me a little bit about who are buying some of these properties. Tell me a little bit about, why they're buying out in West Texas, who they are, and tell us a little bit about that. Maybe Grant, you can fill us in a little bit of what you think.
Yeah. So, I think we've seen a lot of, just like everybody else in probably lots of other markets, we've seen a big influx from the West Coast, California, Washington, even like Arizona, works people from Arizona. And then also being pushed out, there was a deal down in Temple, guy was from New York that bought it. It's right in that I-35 corridor, and it's from New York City, worked for a big bank, decided to invest in Temple. So really it comes from all over. And then, of course, we're seeing a pretty big influx actually from y'all in Dallas. I think a lot of people, when you're sort of gauging, and I know may get into this a little bit later on, cap rates and prices and things like that, they're sort of age of technology, and you can be an absentee owner from all over the place. You're seeing a lot of similarities between all markets, but still, prices seem to be in a position where pretty much no matter what, it's going to be a little bit more affordable on a per unit basis in most of these secondary and tertiary markets. So you can just, especially if you're looking to pick up lots of units, or maybe you're with a syndication group, those bigger buyers are able to find more bang for their buck. And so we're getting them from all over.
So when people come in to see you or get one of your flyers or see something that you're advertising, what is the first thing that the potential buyer is asking you about a possible transaction? What's the first thing they say besides, "Hello, Greg"?
I'd say, especially in some of these markets that aren't as well known, I think you got to let them know about the town and what, who the employers are and what drives the economy before they get interested in the property. First of all, the town and the size of the property is what they're usually talking about.
So let's kind of go through some of the towns here. Everyone knows a little bit about Lubbock if they're from Texas. And again, I guess what's the phrase, Grant, guns up? Is that something that you're familiar with?
Yeah, guns up, Roehm Tech.
That's right.
Orange Down, that's another acceptable one.
Tell us a little bit about if people that are not familiar with Lubbock. Again, let's walk around the state a little bit. What's Lubbock famous for? What are some of the employers up out of Lubbock? What do these people do for a living?
So there's a pretty good mix. I think that's one thing that surprises a lot of people, especially if they've never been to Texas, especially coming from the West Coast, is really just how diverse a lot of these smaller economies are. Because also, too, Lubbock is approaching 300,000 people. And so in pretty much any other state, that would be a rather large city. And so, all these cities, for the most part, are very small business friendly to medium-sized business friendly, and they all have, like Lubbock, more of a three-pronged approach to the overarching economy. So you've got a healthcare system between UMC, that's University Medical Center, and Covenant Health that serve over 1 million people throughout West Texas and eastern New Mexico. And you've got a lot of agribusiness from some of the largest cotton producers in the world, and then also too you've got quite a bit of jobs and high level employment from the university system. It's not just Texas Tech University, but you've got 2 universities alone in Lubbock, multiple universities on I-27 up through Amarillo. And all of these universities have their university systems and research departments and health departments. And that employs a lot of people. And so, you have a lot of small local business that are supporting the economy, but also a lot of really large overarching, no such thing as recession-proof businesses, but very, very stable businesses. Yeah.
Would you say it's a stable town? Would you say it is a growing town, Lubbock?
Yes, growing and stable. If you kind of compare the volatility on job growth in Lubbock to the nation, it's a lot better here. Lubbock and El Paso are very similar on how stable job growth is. Really, the only wild market in West Texas is Midland, Odessa. It's oil driven, but the rest of these are steadily growing markets.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Midland, Odessa, and how far is that from Lubbock? And tell us a little bit about Midland, Odessa.
It's about 1 hour and 45 minutes south of Lubbock. So a lot of stuff that goes on in the oil doesn't really affect Lubbock as much. I'd say Midland, Odessa, and San Angelo, Abilene, those are probably ones that are affected by oil more so. But For the last probably 8 months, 9 months, Midland, Odessa has been about 75% occupied. Now the market occupancy is about 80. This happened also back in 2015 and 16. It took a big dip, and within a year and a half, it recovered. So that's a market. It's one of the fastest. If you look at job growth over a 15-year period, it's better than any other market that we cover. It's just volatile. So if you buy there, you need to probably not get as leveraged. You need to be willing to hang on to it long term.
Well, talk a little bit about why is it so volatile? What's going on that people are not familiar with Midland, Odessa? What's the big industry out there?
It's pretty much all oil and gas. So if the oil price is down, then jobs are going to leave, and so is sort of your tenants. But when the oil price get back up and stabilize, and it's prices per door and units probably as good as anywhere else in the nation is high. It's just volatile.
And then let's go up a little bit further north, up to the panhandle of Texas of Amarillo. Grant, tell us a little bit about your take on Amarillo.
So Amarillo is a pretty similar market to Lubbock in terms of demographics. Usually track very similar. They're only about hour 45 apart. Amarillo is about hour 45 north on I-27. And, just like Lubbock, you've got some West Texas banking. Happy State Bank is a $5 or $6 billion bank. They're headquartered there now. You've got Pantex. It's a big government contractor employee. Tyson Foods has a headquarters there. And it's right on I-40. And so, if you're anywhere manufacturing or transportation from Albuquerque pretty much out east, you'll pass through Amarillo. And so that's a big stopping point for a lot of people. The big buzz around there in Lubbock right now is Amazon's putting a little over 1 million square feet in Amarillo and, a little over 250,000 square feet in Lubbock. And that's really grown a lot too. So people are pretty excited about that.
Yeah. Amarillo, just like Grant was saying, it cuts across the United States with that highway called I-40. So if you're going from Oklahoma City, or you're going from points east all the way out to Albuquerque and then farther west, you got to go through Amarillo. So it is a great transportation piece to the deal. Natural gas a little bit up in that neck of the woods. But of course, you can see how big I am. It's the home of the 72-ounce steak that I'm sure that if you haven't passed the 72-ounce steak billboard, where you're required within 1 hour, I think, in Grant, you could probably clue us in on that.
It's a town that you can eat free if you wanted to. You got to be really hungry if you can handle it, but you can eat free.
So we've done a lot of transactions again out in Midland, Odessa. We've done it a lot in Amarillo and in Lubbock. Let's talk a little bit about El Paso and work our way down maybe to San Angelo. So El Paso, tell us a little bit more about El Paso.
Like I said earlier, mainly the location, as far as it being halfway between DFW and San Diego. The location alone isolates it from pretty much everywhere else in Texas. I mean, you could drive from east of El Paso and it'd take you probably three or 4 hours to get to another decent sized town. But there's a lot of international trade with Mexico is probably the biggest thing. But they also have the Army base there and just all the trade along I-10.
Yeah, a huge corridor. You got Juarez, Mexico on one side. On the south side of El Paso, the UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso, the international airport that brings people in from Mexico into other places that they're going to within the United States. Great labor. But just like we were saying, Fort Bliss is one of the most active bases in the country. And it's actually a growing base there too. And so El Paso is another thumbs up area of multifamily. Let's work our way down to San Angelo, a little bit farther south and east of El Paso. What's going on in San Angelo?
So, San Angelo is also home to a military presence. They've got Goodfellow Air Force Base there. It's obviously smaller than in El Paso, but one of the main things there is it's an intelligence-based community. So you have a lot of high-level professions. They actually have allied countries from around the world. And I don't know how it was during COVID, but they come and train there on a trimester basis just to, learn about the intelligence community. And that's where the UAV patrol for the southern border, they actually land their drones in San Angelo. So that's a big presence there. You also have Johnson & Johnson has a huge, it's actually, I think, a Cold War era bunker that they occupy underground. Is a big manufacturing site for like 86% of the world's sutures. We were talking to a guy at the economic development office there, and he was saying one of their, I guess, fun facts, if you call it, is, if they lost power for 36 hours, there'd be a global health crisis, which I think we've had enough of. But San Angelo, it's an important place. And so there's a lot there. Angelo State University is actually part of the Texas Tech University system out of Lubbock. So that's another big employer. But for 100,000 people, it's got a pretty diverse economy.
Last question is, what town did we miss in our drive around West Texas that you think is important?
Yeah, Abilene's another town that we've done some stuff in there and around Abilene. You also have like Snyder and Sweetwater, which are smaller towns. But yeah, Abilene, it's probably the closest to DFW. Couple hours outside of town, and they've got Dyess Air Force Base, and they have 4 different smaller colleges there, little universities, ACU and Hardin-Simmons, and a couple other smaller ones, and then they've got all the wind farms. If you're driving west Abilene towards Lubbock, you'll see, especially around Sweetwater, it's one of the probably biggest wind farms in the state for sure. The
National Wind Institute is actually based out of Lubbock at Texas Tech University. So a lot of different alternative energy sources going in from San Angelo out west.
Are people, because COVID has had such an impact of people moving to areas that maybe are a little cheaper, to take maybe advantage of taxes, income taxes? Are you seeing a lot of people come from different parts of the country to come and live in West Texas? Tell me a little bit about just the key demographics that you're seeing. Are these places growing?
I haven't, personally noticed a lot of. I mean, it's not like you get a lot of people out of DFW moving to Lubbock to get away from COVID. I mean, Lubbock's kind of the bigger town in the area, so yeah. I mean, it's been stable throughout COVID, but there are people we talk to, even some of our clients that live in California, they're moving to not necessarily Lubbock, but they'll go down to Austin or the Hill Country. There's a lot of people. Part of the Hill Country between San Antonio and Austin is one of the fastest growing areas in the nation, and a lot of that is people moving out of California.
With West Texas, it's a little bit different from these large metropolitan areas. When investors come in, and besides asking you a little bit more about, tell us a little bit of the story about Lubbock, or tell us a little story about Amarillo, what are you seeing for cap rates on some of these properties in West Texas? Again, West Texas is just a huge area. It could be a whole different country. And what's interesting is that Greg and Grant support almost a whole different country, size of a couple large states that would fit into West Texas. So it's amazing that the presence that they have out in West Texas. But what kind of cap rates can investors look at in West Texas?
I think that's a loaded question. We've seen stuff from 4 to 10 or 11%. 11% is kind of a wild card, and the 4% was actually on a Class C deal that was in the 70s occupancy. It was a big value add project. I think the cap rate, one thing you need for the cap rate is know what kind of NOI you're talking about. Are you talking about pro forma NOI? Are you talking about T12 or T1, T3? So what we like doing, if there's a market that doesn't have a whole lot of sales, so like in Lubbock or Amarillo, any of these markets, they may have 5 or 10 sales a year that are decent size to go off of. So one may be a new property, one may be built in the 60s, one may be an 80s deal with value add. So getting the stabilized cap rate hard. We do use the band of investment quite a bit, which is, since 75% or so of your return is going to be based on what kind of financing you can get. We use that, and along with what investors want, like if they want an 8%, 6% cash on cash return, then you can figure out what kind of cap rate. With the interest rates so low, if you can get agency debt say your investors wanted 6 or 8%, you could buy something at 6% cap rate and still hit your return metrics. But I think it's important to look at overall yield over your hold period, whether it's 5 years, 10 years. and then also just see what kind of value add opportunities there are. But if you're wanting to put like a number on a Class C property, probably on the 6.25, 6.5, somewhere around there in some of these markets is.
So, but you probably would make a generalization that the cap rates on some of these West Texas deals are going to be higher or lower. You tell me higher or lower than they would be in areas of like Austin or San Antonio or Dallas.
Oh, they're going to be higher. I mean, we're not selling stuff for 4.5 caps here unless it's way unstabilized. So
when I would say the overarching question that we get from a lot of investors on, if I could buy a 6 cap, or even if it's something priced a little higher at 5.5%, why would I buy in Lubbock versus in Dallas? And typically the answer is still that you can get twice as many units. You're not buying that's really, it's scalability. The price per door is still low enough that, you're paying about the same, but you're also getting that 3.5% interest rate that you wanted, and you're getting your interest only. Instead of 100 units, you could get 200. And so that's a big selling point as well.
Tell me a little bit about that. Can you pick on just one transaction either you have on the market or something that's closed or has closed recently? Can you kind of just highlight one transaction that you thought was something that was interesting for people to know or to think about?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about the Cove. That's probably one of our more, we sold a couple months ago or last, I can't remember when it closed, but it's 119 units. The probably unique thing about that one is that it was all smaller units. It used to be a hotel a long time ago, and so it's all pretty much 1 bedrooms and efficiencies. It's in a really good location, but it's built in the 70s, and
they converted it.
Yeah, a long time, probably 3 owners ago. I know the last 2 owners, it's always been operated as apartments, as far as I know, but it's laid out like a hotel, and said good location. That this group, Grant was working with the buyer group, is a syndication group out of Dallas.
And
so the syndication group out of Dallas, I was working with VFR Capital Investments. It's a pleasure to work with them, and they had part of their sponsorship group was through Elevate as well, and there were a couple others. Apologize not naming them, but they were great to work with. But syndication group out of Dallas bought this deal, and everybody came to an agreement on price. But they had the same idea when they were looking in Lubbock, and what got them interested in secondary markets was just the ability to scale up quicker than if they were focused in DFW, competing against 25, 30 offers, to get their foot in the door on something that's maybe less than ideal, or maybe what they thought was they're overpaying for. And so they were able to take their time a little bit more, make some educated guesses, and really paid off well for them.
That's great. And again, West Texas is a little bit, some interesting plays in West Texas with some nice properties out there, salt of the earth tenants out there. But tell us a little bit about how some of these deals get financed and how you've seen some of these deals get financed. Is it bank debt? Is it Fannie Mae? Is it Freddie Mac? Tell us a little bit about what people can expect for financing out in West Texas.
I think it's a bit of everything. I mean, we sold a deal in Amarillo several months ago. It was all cash. It was about $4.5 million all cash. We've got one deal under contract right now, Del Estrado Townhomes, and it's a REIT that's buying it, a private REIT out of DFW. And we've got some stuff that's got Freddie Mac loans. We've got one that's a Freddie Mac assumption, and the rest of them are bank, bridge debt, local banks, and
the Cove was a bridge lender, and then there was another deal with some bank presence, and there's a lot of banks from outside of Texas too that are still working in these secondary markets. There was a transaction I'm thinking of in Amarillo where it was they actually got a bank loan. It was a bank out of California that the borrower had previous experience with, and they were able to get a 30-year bank loan with 3.5% or 3.75% interest rate on I think a 10-year term out in and this is in Amarillo. It was a nice property, stabilized, but built in the 70s, and there's going to be some room for improvement. But you have people looking for all over. The money's coming from a lot of places.
Let's talk a little bit about where the money's coming from. Where are you seeing? You went through a little bit of this. Is a lot more of like DFW or Houston syndicators coming up into your neck of the woods, or is it people from Chicago or New York or some of these other areas that maybe not be familiar, but maybe chasing a cap rate or a yield on a deal. Again, out of 10 calls you get a day, let's say, how many are from local, how many are from the state of Texas, and how many are from outside the state?
I'd say probably a third of them are California.
Really?
And probably a third are DFW, or not so much Houston, but definitely a lot of activity out of DFW of those guys coming here. And, Colorado, there's a lot of groups out of Colorado. There's some big ownership groups out of the Denver area that have property all over Texas. So those are probably the top three areas.
I would say the syndication presence, especially I've noticed, comes out of Dallas a lot of times. At least in my experience, my calls, but the people coming out of California, sometimes it's a lot of people that are trading up from not even so much single family, but really, smaller multifamily portfolios that they're getting just astronomical $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a unit for, and they're able to, 1031 into a much larger project in West Texas. And so it's, partnerships, husband and wife, or a small group of investors. Someone's been doing it a long time. But a lot of the syndication I've noticed, Dallas, Austin.
Walk me through a typical transaction. You offer a property for sale, buyer comes in, wants to make an offer on the deal. Now, you put out an LOI into the deal. You guys review it. You're representing the seller in the deal. Are you requiring, or is the seller requiring hard money into the deal day one? Or tell us a little bit about where the market is right now.
Yes, I mean, more so are the listings that we're taking out are getting multiple offers, and sellers are starting to require more hard earnest money day one. I mean, used to, 3 or 4 years ago in Lubbock, you could tie up a property for $500 or so for 30 days. That's not happening anymore. And what's interesting is the people that bought 5 years ago, that in some cases that's kind of what they're expecting, but now people are offering all this non-refundable money, and it's a lot better. And that's about the only way you can keep somebody from retrading a deal, is giving them where they've got something to walk away from. Otherwise, they can put in a great offer, not have a lot of feasibility money, and then come back and hit you a few days later after they do their inspections. And really, non-refundable money is the only way to stop that.
And especially too with the influx of multiple offers, you get people that are really just trying to get their foot in the door. Taking that high price to give the seller what they want is great, but if you don't really intend to do what your letter of intent says, then let's try and see what information we can get you up front and make you a little bit more comfortable about the deal. Because really, it's not about how much money am I going to lose when I walk away. It should be, I'm not going to walk away, so here's what I'm comfortable putting up. And you got to have some good faith money. You can't even tie up a house in Lubbock without putting up some hard money, at least a little bit. So you got to have some skin in the game, make people feel a little bit more comfortable.
What is the timing in trying to close some of these deals from the LOI to the point that you're closing out in West Texas? Is due diligence a little longer? Is appraisals a little longer? Tell us a little bit about just the state of the market that you're seeing out there for being a realist.
I'd say a typical time frame is a 30-day feasibility period, maybe 45-day financing contingency. That way, after you get done with your due diligence, you have time to get your appraisal in. And then maybe like 60-day, 30 days after that, closing, or 15 days after your financing contingency's up. If you're doing Fannie or Freddie, you probably add another month or at least a couple of weeks to that time frame.
And Grant, I mean, you're on the phones, you're talking to people. Where are the opportunities in West Texas? Is there a specific property type? Is it a specific area of West Texas? Is it Lubbock? Is it Amarillo? Is it Midland, Odessa, El Paso? Give me what just between you and I. Where are the opportunities? Where should people be looking at?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities that don't necessarily, they're not always the flashiest. It's not always going to have that, Greg and I were talking about this earlier. It's not always going to have that value add buzzword on there. There's a lot of value comes from, mismanagement or even inefficient management, or, a lot of the mom and pop owners out here that have owned for a long, long time and haven't had any competition from any other cities. And so there's a lot of those opportunities coming up. But I'd say if you're going to go look for something, you can go to our website. One, I will plug that, gogettersmultifamily.com. But on our looking at market demographics, if you measure the income in a lot of these cities, median average income, and you find out that most people are paying between 15, 18, or 22% of their median income towards housing or accommodation. And then you kind of isolate and say, hey, look, especially in a lot of these West Texas markets, there's still a pretty big gap between average mortgage payment and average rent in terms of affordability. And so you can see that, hey, look, there's room to grow. People here in this town are paying 18% of their salary towards housing, and the national market and the rest of Texas is saying it should probably be closer to 30. You've got room to grow your rents. It's not going to be overnight, but slow and steady, but there's still room to grow. And you can see that the median income still supports an affordability for multifamily versus owning a house.
On a Class C property, let's say in Lubbock, the property is, let's say, a 1980s property. Where are rents at for like a 2-bedroom unit? And if someone came in and did a little value added to the property, are they able to get the pop up in rents? And the reason why I asked that question is that some of the areas up in Oklahoma, as an example, that you put $4,000 or $5,000 a door into it, and you may be only able to get $25 or $50 in jump up in rents. What type of if you do a little value added, what type of a jump up can you see in rents on some of these properties in West Texas?
It varies in some spots, but really the secondary markets, you got to pay attention to your tenant base on the property specific. Just because, Lubbock, one of the major employers is Texas Tech, but not necessarily every property is a student property. And so, even a couple of years ago, you might have been looking at 85 cents a foot, 90 cents a foot for just a standard sort of C plus, B minus type of property. Whereas now you're looking at, $1, maybe even more than $1 a foot. People are looking for the nicer product. They want the, not even necessarily granite countertops or stainless steel, but the upgrade for them would be just a nicer Formica and black appliances instead of the old, 70s white appliances and a spray on countertop. Pay attention to your product type and who's living in that market. Cause if you're coming from somewhere else where you had a certain expected quality of life from the tenant base, it's not necessarily poor quality of life, but it's just that people are used to different things. And so you could really make an upgrade by just, tweaking it slightly. And that's really pretty important.
The average 2-bedroom Class B apartment right now is renting for about $834. So, you could get a $50 rent bump if you did basic things and got it nice. That shouldn't be an issue. I wouldn't come in here and think in a loving thing you get $200 rent bumps easily. I think that'd be a pretty big stretch. But I think a $50, $75 for just some basic updates is feasible.
So you probably spend $2,000-$3,000 for the basic updates of the property to get maybe $75 worth of value add.
Yeah, but probably if it needed flooring, you're probably looking at $3,500 to $4,500 to update a unit. Pretty nice.
Yeah, because we get that question asked all the time: is in certain areas, how much money can we put into the deal till we get the jump up in rents? And some of these areas are flat. They just don't have the capacity. The tenants don't have the capacity or don't want to pay anything more. Even if you were to upgrade it and make it a nicer property, they're just not going to pay. But it sounds like you do have some flexibility of what you're seeing in rents these days.
Yes, that's
good. Our final thoughts. Just tell us a little bit about the future of you think where the market is going to go. Is there hope that it's going to continue to do well? I'm certainly thinking I'm talking to two very optimistic people, but what's your prognostication for the future of West Texas?
I think it's going to continue to steadily grow. I don't foresee it like shooting to the moon, but I definitely don't see it going down. I think rents and pricing on everything's going to keep going up. The only thing that could really hurt is if the interest rates went up a lot. That would change things. But other than that, job growth's stable, and there's businesses moving to town. There's people doing well with their businesses they have. Agriculture's doing good. Oil market, it's going to be up and down, but it's on the uphill swing. So I'm definitely very optimistic about it and continue to operate here and invest here, work here. This is home.
That's great. I mean, you do have that West Texas accent, so I know that you've been there in West Texas for a long period of time. And even Grant, who's not from West Texas, from South Texas, I would say, Houston, East, Southeast Texas, has really found a home in Lubbock and doing some great work out in West Texas. Again,
I would say I'm not being held against my will here, so I can vouch for Lubbock and the future of West Texas. Very, very proud to be living out here, and I think there's a lot coming.
So if people wanted to get more information about what you guys do at KW Commercial out in Lubbock on that represents West Texas, what's the best way, Greg, for them to get a hold of you?
The best way is to call me on my cell phone. It's 806-777-4459. Or you can go to our website. It's gogettersmultifamily.com. And my email is gregbrown@kwcommercial.com.
Yeah, I certainly do appreciate the go-getters. Again, I cut you off there, Greg. Tell us the name.
I just say my last name is Brown, not the color brown, with the D as in Delta on the end of it. So gregbrown@kwcommercial.com.
And Grant, what's a good way for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so same here. Cell phone, be 281-520-5809. Still have the Houston area code, but I'm here in West Texas. So there's that. And then gogettersmultifamily.com. And my email is just first name, Grant.my last name, ROEHM @kwcommercial.com. That's the best way to reach us.
That's great. So, Brian, thanks for hanging out with us. I certainly do appreciate Greg and Grant with KW Commercial in West Texas hanging out with us today. We certainly did learn a lot about what's going on in their neck of the woods. So if you're thinking about making an investment or talking to multifamily, talk to these guys out in West Texas. They certainly know what's going on out there. Great resource for you in the multifamily space. So guys, certainly do appreciate it. Grant, Greg, Ryan, I'm Paul Peebles. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitalpodcast.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you next week for another great interview.